Hey folks, welcome back to the channel. My name's Record Dave and today we're talking about Jimmy Page's 1960 Les Paul Custom Black Beauty. It went missing for 44 years. Yes folks, thanks for joining me. Today we are talking about Jimmy Page's guitar that went missing for 44 years. And he missed it every single day of those 44 years. But before we get into it, can you hit that subscribe button and the like button? Do the things that you do on YouTube because that's important. It helps the channel grow and really does help me out. So if you could do that, that would be super cool. Now, Jimmy Page, there's two things you think of when you hear the words Jimmy Page. Those two things are rock and roll. So I think Jimmy Page is, if not the most iconic rock guitarist of all time, he is definitely one of the most. Created some of the biggest rock songs, guitar riffs and so on in the world ever, and has been part of our lives since the early 60s, of course. He was 18 when he went into a guitar store in London in 1962, in fact, and purchased himself a Les Paul Custom from 1960. It was a Les Paul Custom Black Beauty with 3 pickups, and it cost him the sum of £185. Now, just imagine that for a second. £185. Jimmy Page bought a Les Paul Black Beauty. Now, that's incredible. Try and buy a Les Paul for that kind of money now. You'd struggle. You would struggle. But of course, £185 then was a lot more money than it is now. It was a huge outlay. He paid off this guitar. Of course, he was a session musician at this time, even as an 18-year-old picking up session gigs. But as an 18-year-old, Led Zeppelin wasn't even a twinkle in his eye. And it wasn't until about 8 years later when Led Zeppelin went to the US for their stateside tour that Jimmy took this guitar out on the road. He used it in the studio several times before that, but this was the first time he took it on tour. And in April of 1970 in Minnesota, played a gig, everything was fine. They rolled on, and at their next gig, the guitar wasn't there. So what happened? They couldn't find it. Jimmy was not happy, missed his guitar very much. In fact, took out ads and offered a reward for the return of his Les Paul Custom Black Beauty, but no avail. The guitar never came forward and nobody ever suggested that they had it. Now roll on 23 years later and a lady brings a guitar into Willie's American Guitars in Minnesota and offers to sell it to them for $5,000. Which they're like, it's a 1960 Les Paul Custom, I'll give you $5,000 for it, no problem. The lady said that her husband worked at Minnesota St. Paul's Airport and was a baggage handler, and he stole a guitar from Led Zeppelin. He was apparently quite proud of this and would mention it to people who asked about his guitar. So he had Jimmy Page's guitar for 23 years. Not quite sure what happened to the man, but he was apparently quite happy to let anyone know that he'd stolen it. So Nate Westgower of Willie's American Guitars took some photographs, got in touch with Jimmy Page's people and said, I think I've got Jimmy Page's guitar. The photographs were checked out and he was told it's not Jimmy's guitar. It doesn't have the extra holes for the extra toggle switches or the Bigsby that Jimmy added. So not his guitar, but thanks. And that was fine. So Nate sold the guitar to one of his employees for $5,500. Not a bad little profit for having the guitar for a few days. The employee took the guitar, loved it, was like rocking out, playing shows with his 1960 Les Paul Custom Black Beauty for years. In fact, 11 years. And then the guitar needed some repairs because, he'd been playing it pretty hard and he brought it into Willie's American Guitars for repairs. They did some further testing while the guitar was in for repairs. In fact, they used a black light, and that's when they found that there was previous repairs showing up where they could see holes for extra toggle switches and potentially a Bigsby. So they got in touch again with Page's people and were like, hey, do you want to check it again? I think this is your guitar. So after a total of 44 years, Jimmy Page was offered the opportunity to reunite with his beloved 1960 Les Paul Custom Black Beauty with the 3 pickups and all that sort of stuff. and he loved that guitar. He had been missing it for 44 years. So you know what he did? He offered the employee who now owned the guitar a 1959 Les Paul Custom as an exchange. That guitar was valued at $45,000 in 2014, probably a lot more now. So not too shabby an exchange, but I wanted to ask you a couple of things about this story. If you had a guitar that you had mislaid 44 years ago, would you still be pining for it 44 years later? And beyond that, what do you think of this story of Jimmy Page's guitar that went missing for 44 years and then he reunited with it and gave somebody a very cool 59 Les Paul Custom in exchange? I think it's a great story. There's lots of these lost and found stories, but I think Jimmy Page's is the most iconic because he's Jimmy Page at the end of the day. Anyway, let me know what you think in the comment section below. Don't forget to hit the like and subscribe. Don't forget, you can check out Patreon, get all these videos 24 hours in advance, and also get additional exclusive Patreon videos. I've been 3-Chord Dave. You've been fantastic. I'll be back with another guitar related video very soon, but until then, take care.